Want to use a PGR in your cereals but have no time for a separate pass? Manipulator PGR can be applied as early as one tiller. Just add it to your herbicide to reduce lodging, increase harvest efficiency, and maximize yields. Talk to your retailer for more info and to confirm acceptable tank mixes.
I'm Shaun Haney, and this is RealAg on the Weekend. Let's get real and get connected with the week that was in Canadian agriculture. RealAg on the Weekend starts now. Welcome to RealAg on the Weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CJME. I'm your host, Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture.com. Hope you had yourself a great week. And speaking of RealAgriculture.com, make sure you go there and you check out all the great stories and videos and podcasts that we're putting up on the site every single day. If you are interested in podcasts, you can find all of our great podcasts by going to realagriculture.com/podcast. We've got a bunch of great ones. The RealAg Radio show is one example, but there's a whole bunch of others as well. Agronomy, ag politics, farm show coverage, Mind Your Farm Business, the farm management podcast I do. There's a lot of great stuff there. This was a busy, heavy week in terms of news. And as many of you are getting a little bit closer to being out in the field, we definitely had a lot to break down when it came to the federal budget as released by Canadian Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland on Tuesday. Now, a lot of the budget details had been leaked or presented prior to the budget, as this Liberal government really does struggle in the polls. We've talked about that a lot. Now it's a 20-point difference between the Conservatives and the Liberals, according to Abacus data. So kind of a last-ditch chance effort, one may look at it and say, the Liberals really needed to make some ground. Their only chance to close this gap was to really come out of the gates here with a budget 18 months before we have to have an election with some things that would move Canadians. Increasing spending and increasing taxes, not ways to, I think, really close the gap. Kind of an epic fail in that regards. Today on the show, we're going to hear RealAgriculture.com's Kelvin Heppner talk about his reaction to what he heard or didn't hear in the budget. We're going to hear from Ryan Kehrig. He's with MNP. We're going to talk about the changes to the capital gains exemption. That is really one I think that's going to impact agriculture. We'll get Ryan's opinion on that. And we're also going to hear today from Landon Fahlman from Farm Credit Canada in a product spotlight as well. If you have any feedback on today's show, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find Real Agriculture across all the different social media platforms. You're also more than welcome to call the RealAg feedback line. What you do is you dial this number, you press the number 3, and you leave me a message, 855-776-6147. You know, this week's budget was just another example of why I think we should be concerned about Canada. And I'm not trying to be a doomsday person at all, but I think there's a separation of what we would like to see, or what this government would like to see, I should say, and the realities of the global market that we are in. And at a time where we struggle to, say, attract capital, we're struggling to compete against some external factors, right? Like the Inflation Reduction Act in the U.S., the struggle to attract capital to our country. I'm working on a project, or I'm been doing a lot of research when it comes to ag VenCap funding. And this is something, as I talk to stakeholders, it's been made very, very clear to me that there is a struggle here, and there's some barriers that need to be addressed. Of course, I'm talking to you, Saskatchewan. You know very full well some of the challenges of the carbon tax. We've got some barriers, and we're not helping ourselves when it comes to us being able to achieve ultimate success. And one of the other pieces that is, I think, lost, when I look at all of the factors of this budget and some of the commentary and some of the reaction, the piece that is missing to me is there's two words, but they're very attached, okay? The word that really comes to mind is, how does this budget increase the competitiveness of Canada? That's, I think, the gap. That's the piece that is really missing. Where are the components of this budget that unlock the potential of Canada? As you know, I have moderated many panels over the last 3 years at different conferences and meetings about, unlocking the potential of agriculture. Well, forget about just agriculture. There's a lot of different industries that I think fall into this bucket. And how does it allow us to face some of the headwinds, increase protectionism? Whatever happens with the U.S. election and some of the trade and the factors there with Canada and the U.S. and other trading partners around the world. How does this budget make us more competitive? I'd like to get your feedback on that. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Does this budget make us more competitive or less competitive? Send me your thoughts. Okay, we're going to take a break. We'll be back with more here of RealAg on the Weekend. We're talking about the federal budget. When we come back, you're listening to 650 CKOM, 980 CGME.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
There's a reason we call it the Corn School. Videos on everything from planter setup to weed control, field trial results, and the latest yield strategies. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast in your favorite podcast app. Check out the latest Corn School episode today.
And welcome back to RealAg on the Weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CJME. Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture.com, your host. As I mentioned, of course, this week we had the federal budget released by Canadian Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland. There's a lot of takeaways and things to consider from this budget, and I sort of mentioned some of that in the opening. Earlier this week on the RealAg Radio podcast, I caught up with my fellow team member, Kelvin Heppner of Real Agriculture, who was really on this file. This was his week's assignment, really tackling the things in and not in the federal budget this week related to agriculture. Here's my discussion with Kelvin right after the budget was released.
Well, this is a tax and spend budget, more taxes and more spending. And so we finally, yesterday, I think some of the bottom line numbers were new yesterday in terms of new information. We'd seen the government over the last number of weeks announce a lot of different specific initiatives regarding housing and school food program and those types of things. Now we actually got to see some of the bottom lines, and that includes a nearly $40 billion deficit for this year. Debt servicing is going to take up a larger piece of the government pie, with debt payments expected to make up around 10% of total government expenditures in the upcoming year.
Wow.
So just some of those big picture numbers, that kind of is the backdrop for a budget that, sure, the deficit is actually on target for what they talked about last year and last fall in the economic statement, right around that $40 billion mark. But they've done that so they've increased spending, but they've also increased tax revenue to keep that deficit at that point. So more taxes and more spending, I think, sums it up.
So not exactly converting themselves into fiscal hawks, so to speak.
No, I think this is more of the same. This is the Trudeau government doubling down on the government is here to solve all your problems type of messaging. And that's something that has kind of gotten them into the place where they are right now in the polls. And so there's certainly an overarching message here too. And even the name of the budget, it talked about fairness, tax fairness for different generations. So Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland emphasized in her messaging around the budget yesterday that this is about giving younger generations more advantages and helping them out, helping them feel like they're not under the thumb of older generations kind of thing. So that, in other words, could be perceived as wealth redistribution, not so much wealth creation. And that's where a lot of the concerns are coming from in the agriculture sector as well as in the broader business community.
And we seem to be kind of defeatist on how we deal with some of these things. And I agree with you in terms of the perceptions of, hey, I'm from the government, I'm here to help. And instead of creating a platform to, spark the drive of individuals to reach some of these end goals that we have as a country. So, okay, agriculture, did it fit into this budget at all?
I would say in general, after having covered quite a few of these federal budgets in the past, this budget probably had as least or the lowest amount of agricultural content that I can remember in terms of new initiatives. Yeah.
Wow.
And I don't know if that can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on your perception or what you wanted to see. I know farm groups, certainly Canadian Federation of Agriculture, Grain Growers of Canada, the Wheat Growers, Canadian Cattle Association, some mixed messages and a lot of disappointment about what was not in the budget, what was not mentioned. So considering that there was this big increase in spending, a lot of things didn't get funding that people were hoping to see. Going back to that overall theme, though, Shaun, of perhaps being a bit down on ourselves or hurting ourselves, shooting ourselves in the foot kind of thing, the expanded capital gains tax is something that is certainly getting a lot of attention today, the day after the budget, as a disincentive to investment in capital for small businesses, and that includes farms across Canada. So one of the big changes yesterday that was announced is that they're going to be increasing the inclusion rate on annual capital gains from 1/2 to 2/3. So this is the portion of a capital gain if somebody sells their second home, or if somebody sells farmland that they bought years ago and it's increased in value. That capital gain, until now, 1/2 of it was taxable. Now it's going to increase to 2/3 being taxable. And so for individuals, the higher rate would only apply to capital gains above 250,000. But for corporations, it will apply to all capital gains realized, that higher rate. They have at the same time, to maybe soften the blow, and this is something that farmers are certainly quite familiar with, the lifetime capital gains exemption. Yeah. They have increased that. It was just over $1 million, and it is effective June 25th. It will be increasing to 1.25 million and will be continued to be indexed to inflation thereafter. So that, I think, is a positive thing that groups like the Canadian Federation of Agriculture are welcoming, that increase to the lifetime capital gains exemption.
There was even mentions of some of the topics that we do discuss here on a regular basis. One of the words that came up that kind of surprised me, and maybe not you, is interoperability. How did that work itself into the budget?
Well, it was almost a copy and paste paragraph from last year's budget. So the government plans to launch consultations in June on interoperability so that farmers can use their equipment in the way that is best for their farm. That was a quote from the budget. It also referred to this being a tool in helping lower food costs, because there was a sentence that drew some high criticism in the budget yesterday that referred to farmers, when they buy new equipment, it's expensive, and so that cost is passed down to the checkout counter, and so food costs increase as a result. So I don't know if that's how farming actually works, or at least whoever wrote the budget doesn't have a great understanding, obviously. So last year's budget, though, included a similar pledge. So this has to do with different brands of equipment not working together, and government wants to crack down on making sure that there are reduced barriers when it comes to farmers being able to hook up different types of equipment together. So that, I think, is something that most farmers welcome. It's something, again, that I'm not sure it has a direct correlation with food costs, especially for a government that denies that a carbon tax has anything to do with food costs.
Yeah, there's a little bit of hypocrisy there. That's a good point by yourself, for sure. Any expansion of things like some of the business risk management programs or sustainable ag strategy or any of that kind of programming?
No, that was one thing that was notably absent. There was a line in there about the government is consulting with stakeholders like the Canadian Cattle Association on risk management for livestock producers and producers when they go through disaster situations, that type of thing, which the CCA took as a positive commitment from the government. It remains to be seen what kind of follow through there will be on that. But it was kind of actually surprising. The Trudeau government has historically used the budget to announce new climate-related programs over the last number of years, whether it's the On-Farm Climate Action Fund, the Agricultural Clean Technology Fund, the Sustainable Ag Strategy, which you mentioned. And I couldn't find any mention of any of those initiatives, and that included new funding for any of those initiatives in the budget. So that's an example of where, despite increased spending, we didn't see discussion or even new funding for some of those programs. That's something we'll have to stay tuned or follow up on, what the future of those programs looks like if there isn't new funding coming for them announced in the budget. Some groups are also hoping to see action on the Canada Grain Act in the budget, as after about a year ago, we saw former Federal Ag Minister Marie-Claude Bibeau say that she wanted to see legislative or regulatory reform to the Canada Grain Act or the related regulations by the end of 2023. Well, that date came and went. We saw a change in Ag Minister. And so I think there was some expectation that maybe there would be some mention of plans on this file in the budget. And Grain Growers of Canada, the Western Canadian Wheat Growers Association, were both disappointed to not see anything about the Canada Grain Act in the budget. Also, no mention of the extended rail interswitching pilot that was announced last year. Whether that will be continued, that was also not referred to in the budget yesterday.
From getting outside the agricultural bubble, what has been the reaction from analysts and economists and people that follow these kinds of things on a regular basis? Is this budget getting praise, criticism? Where does it kind of land?
Well, I think it depends on the context in which you're coming from. This is a clear effort by the government to appeal to younger voters. I don't know whether this will be enough to move the needle. There's a lot of different programs with big names, and it's just overwhelming figuring out what you have 100 different programs. You've got the housing accelerator funds, and artificial intelligence investment, and all these different areas that the government is investing in, and it's hard to know what that actually means practically on the ground to an average typical voter. So I do see some challenges there, and then in terms of the business community, there's certainly a lot of criticism when it comes to increases to the capital gains tax inclusion rate and the competitiveness, how this could hurt competitiveness of Canadian business, and how we could see investment in capital shift elsewhere. Some of the accounting firm analysis that I've seen so far shows on like a provincial, depends on which province you're in, what that higher and tax bracket rate is. But this change to the capital gains tax could increase the tax rate on that capital gain anywhere from 7 to 9% in most provinces is kind of what I've seen. So right away that could it impacts competitiveness, and also I expect a lot of these things are only expected to take effect end of June 25th. So we could see, I'm guessing there will be some people trying to realize those capital gains before the higher inclusion rate takes effect.
Yeah, a real rush job on, how we were thinking about selling our business? Now. It could be a real busy couple months here for accountants and lawyers.
Yeah, so business community, I would say, is negative. People who are really concerned and following the housing file closely say there's some good stuff in here that could potentially make a difference. But again, some of the government's targets are like they need record housing construction for the next 7 years for a really long time, every year to actually reach some of these targets. So not completely realistic, but yeah. So, and there's also the school food program, which I'm not sure anybody can really have a strong argument against. And so in many ways, I think the Trudeau government has tried to, this budget is really an election budget. It's the last one that they will actually have a chance at implementing and having take effect and people notice before an election, which has to happen, of course, by in less than a year and a half. And so I think there's some surprises in here in terms of there was no huge, at least in my opinion, I guess maybe it depends on which files people are following, but no huge attention grabbing topics or announcements that could swing an election, in my opinion, or even change the tone.
That was Kelvin Heppner of RealAgriculture breaking down the federal budget as released on Tuesday. Okay, next, when we come back here on RealAg on the weekend, we're going to hear from MNP's tax specialist, Ryan Kehrig. He's going to talk specifically about the impacts of some of the changes to the capital gains exemptions. This was kind of the biggest takeaway in the budget. I know a lot of you are concerned, and we're going to look at it when we come back. You're listening to Real Ag on the Weekend. Of course, we're here on 650 CKOM, 980 CJME. Get all the information you need to keep your pulse crop healthy and profitable with the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com. The Pulse School is a free YouTube video series covering agronomy, research, and more across a host of different pulse crops. It's also available as an audio podcast wherever you download or stream your favorite podcast. Check us out on YouTube or visit RealAgriculture.com, the Pulse School, brought to you by BSF Canada.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is your one-stop shop for everything a canola grower needs. Check out our free video series on YouTube for all the latest in canola agronomy, research, marketing, and more. Don't have time to watch? Download the podcast version of the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com or anywhere you download your podcasts. Stay on top of all things canola with the Canola School on RealAgriculture.com, brought to you by BASF and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
This segment is brought to you by new Oxbow cereal broadleaf herbicide from New Farm. Oxbow is powered by Duplasan technology that is a workhorse on resistant kochia and other tough weeds in wheat and barley.
And welcome back to Real Ag on the Weekend. I'm your host, Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture.com. Well, on Friday's Real Ag Radio podcast, we broke down some of the impacts of the budget. There's a lot of tax changes, and especially when it comes to capital gains. We brought in Ryan Kehrig. He is National Leader for MNP for Agriculture Tax. And we wanted to get his reaction and get a breakdown on some of the technicals in this regard. He joined our panel, which also include Lindsay Smith and Kelvin Heppner of Real Agriculture and Tyler McCann, Managing Director at CAPI. Here's a portion of that conversation. Okay, so from a tax perspective, is the changes suggested on the capital gains, is that the most significant piece in the budget this week when it comes to taxes?
The capital gain inclusion rate change is by far the largest impact, the largest tax item in the budget this week, probably the largest tax item that we've seen in years, maybe even a decade in Canada here, because it was really interesting how it came up to be this year, because every year there had historically been a lot of chatter about the capital gain inclusion rate changing, but it seemed to have died down, and it was kind of almost a sleeper going into this year's budget. And lo and behold, this is the year the inclusion rate changes. So I think it caught quite a few people in the industry, not as a out of left field, but just as a surprise that this was the year that it finally happened. So,
do you believe they talked about how few Canadians are actually impacted by this change? Do those numbers make sense to you?
It's hard to tell without having the full background story on it. I think you're referring to the 0.13% number and so
Yes.
forth, to be impacted by that. I think that might be reflective of who's impacted on an annual basis, but there's going to be many, many Canadians that will be impacted in specific years, whether it be in a non-farm example through the transferring of a property or a cottage or selling a rental property or anything like that. So it is going to impact more Canadians, I believe, than what the numbers actually indicate, but maybe not on a year-to-year annual basis, but especially for those one-time life events. So,
What's the biggest consequence to Canadian agriculture based on this inclusion rate change?
oh boy. Okay, so there's a few ones to really look at there. The biggest one that I see in the short term right now is going to be those people who are considering selling their farm maybe in the next year or two, depending what their specific numbers look like here and how much lifetime capital gain exemption they have remaining. And we'll come back to that later, the lifetime capital gain exemption here, but their financial planning situation may have changed here depending on their specific numbers. They may have done the math, realize this is going to leave me with X number after tax income, and that's going to go on and fund my retirement years here. Well, those calculations may need to be revisited now to see where that leaves them, and if that mom and dad, in my example, are truly ready and financially secure enough to want to retire at this time, or whether they feel like they need to put in a few more years. So that's the short, immediate impact where I think it's going to be seen. We're also going to see it, I think, a little bit in terms of the succession impacts here. We're going back to my example again, where we'd have mom and dad that want to have an X amount of dollars to fund their retirement. They plan on selling the farm to the farming kid, to the successor. They're going to gift anything over and above that number that they want to have here. Well, if mom and dad want to have X, let's just say $3 million again to fund their retirement here. if they want to have $3 million after tax, they're probably going to have to sell more share equity to their kids at capital gain rates to trigger that $3 million after tax. All mom and dad are really concerned about is how they want that $3 million. That's going to fund their retirement right there. So the kid, there's probably going to be more skimmage, I guess, for lack of a better word, of taxes being paid to the government to leave mom and dad in that position here. So it may make it a little bit harder on the incoming generation, the younger successor generation, to have to generate the cash flows to have those funds available to pay out mom and dad here. So I do see there being a tightening for the younger generation in that regard.
Okay, let's go. Tyler, you got a question for Ryan?
Yeah, I'm curious, Ryan. So the government gave everybody notice on this change, which they don't normally do with tax changes. Do you think that there's going to be some fire sales between now and the 25th of June when the change comes into effect?
That is probably the number one question I've been getting is what is the magic with the June 25th date? And I did because quick calendar searching, it's a Tuesday. It is just the most bizarre of random days. So I have no insight on that date.
Well, you missed it, right? It happens to me on my birthday. So I think this is the gift that the federal government gave me. Tax increases on your birthday, but do you think people will rush to liquidate some assets?
I do think there's going to be different type of transactions. Like the first ones where there's potential sales in process right now, there is going to be a renewed focus to try to get those closed ahead of that time. But you also have to be aware that any purchase and sale agreements, purchasers are going to know now that there is also an arbitrary deadline and tax rate. So there's going to be a little bit more negotiation perhaps, and it may not be as easy to close these type of purchase sale agreements that we see there. I think we're going to see a lot of people come and have discussions with their tax advisors in my first scenario. Like we were thinking about 2-3 years. Is there anything we can do now to maybe crystallize or lock in some of these gains ahead of time?
Yep.
Yeah. That can be a very loaded question because there's a whole lot of tax legislation that's changed in the last year or two, and that'll be very client specific. And a lot of those questions are ultimately going to come down to what kind of lifetime capital gain exemption is left in this scenario. But nothing imminent. The one we'll probably see a lot of is holding companies like portfolio investments. Like if you have a nice healthy gain realized on Royal Bank, maybe you want to ring the register and lock in your capital gain on your Royal Bank stock at the attractive tax rates here, particularly if they're held in a holding company.
Lindsay, you got a question?
I just want to add something.
Sorry. Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. One issue, I think you kind of asked what impact this might have on the ag sector. It's pretty common in a lot of our farm structures that there are holding companies set up where you move excess profits over. It's kind of like a rainy day fund, okay? It really is what it is. It's part of the whole ownership structure. And the reason we do this is because in order to be on side of the farm rollover rules, and those are the very important ones that allow you to transfer your farm to the next generation on tax deferred, and for your capital gain use, you can't be stockpiling excess cash in the operating company. So a common tactic is to transfer this cash to a holding company, and this holding company will earn investment income. Now, a few years back, I guess maybe 5 or 6 years back now, some legislation was introduced where if your holding company starts to earn more than $50,000 of passive income, think investment income, dividend income, capital gain income, the operating farm company will start to see its access to its small business deduction ground down, okay? So no longer would they get the cheap corporate tax rates that everyone thinks of when you think of small business corporations. Well, these capital gains, they used to only be taxed 50% in that calculation. They're now going to jump up to 2/3 post June 25th. So it's going to put even more pressure to stay on side of not having more than $50,000 of this passive income. So I think a long-term effect of this is going to be as potential restrictions or grinds to farming companies' small business deductions here. So, and you think about it materially, nothing has changed. It's the same portfolio, same gain that you had the prior year, just the mechanics of how this calculation works now. So.
Yeah, that's sort of, so maybe I'll defer to Kelvin because that was, I guess, one of my questions. And I think there are many questions yet to ask and a lot that will sort of be figured out in the next couple of days. But from the perspective of, so let's say you are the succeeding generation and you are in the midst of a farm transition, to me, this feels like a rather large wrench being thrown in if you are well into a plan for sure. So how important is it, or what are some of the questions that farmers or generations should be sitting down with their accountant to talk about when it comes to this question?
Okay, so we've really focused on the capital gain inclusion rate change here, but there was a positive announced here as well, which was the bumping up of the lifetime capital gain exemption by roughly $250,000. Of course, that bump up doesn't actually come into play until the new inclusion rate comes in, so it happens at that time. But That is a little bit of a softening blow to the situation you described there, Lindsay. So if we go to how that looks, that will actually help mom and dad on transferring more value or extracting more value from the farm on a potential tax-free basis through the use of this exemption. Because even if they didn't have any before, they are getting some more. But it's ultimately going to come down to the size of the farm that we're talking about and the payment terms, payment structure that mom and dad want to get out. If the successor generation and mom and dad agree that they want to fund this payout over 10, 15 years, there's probably some things we can do to help mitigate or soften the blow of this. But if you get situations where mom or dad are looking for a large upfront cash, that's definitely going to throw a wrench into their plans. And this is going to have a very big impact on the overall estate planning considerations for farms and going forward here. Now, if the farm is still carrying on and transferring to the next generation, the farm rollover rules still apply. Nothing has changed in that regard. But when you start to think about how perhaps non-farm siblings are sometimes handled in type of like estate planning, sometimes they're left with the whole co or other forms of assets. Well, the farm traditionally or sometimes still mostly transfers to the farming children. Well, those holding companies now have an entirely different tax burden being thrown at them here, where when mom and dad had, sat down, thought this is what they thought was fair and equitable, and they came to this. Well, those plans are going to perhaps need to be revisited now, because the eventual rates that the non-farming children are going to receive on that, there's going to be less after-tax proceeds in their hands. So perhaps mom and dad are going to have to revisit what they think is fair and equitable in light of some of these considerations.
There was Ryan Kehrig. He's a national leader for agriculture tax with MNP, talking to our panel, the RealAg Issues panel, and the RealAg Radio podcast on Friday. You can hear that whole conversation by going to search RealAg Radio wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be right back here on RealAg on the weekend. We've got more coming up on the federal budget right after this.
I'm Lindsay Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomists with me, Lindsay Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by BASF and Syngenta Canada.
For today's product spotlight, I'm Lindsay Smith, and joining me is Landon Fahlman. He's the senior product owner with AgExpert. Welcome here, Landon.
Thanks for having me today.
All right, so we're going to talk about AgExpert. First, let's give us an overview. What is AgExpert?
Sure, yeah. AgExpert is a cost production tool designed to help Canadian farmers digitize their records. And so inside of that, we are solving the problem of not having an accurate snapshot of your cost per acre to make decisions. And so AgExpert is broken into two products. We've got accounting software catered to the ag industry, and then we've got AgExpert Field, which is an operational overview of your entire farm, tracking day-to-day operations and cost per acre.
Now, of course, digital tools are there to enhance the decision-making process. How can farmers use AgExpert to do just that?
Yeah, there's some key points with this. I think what it can do is it reduces error within trying to keep paper records. Next, it always has an up-to-date cost of production. As you move through the software, you're constantly keeping that data updated and having that data in the palm of your hands. And then you're able to input your data once and use it in multiple places. So whether that be via our partner network or in different parts of the platform, you're able to input it once and use it a couple different places to get value out of.
Now, so what then is the significance of interconnected data when it comes to operational decisions? How key is that? How important is that?
It's important. I think having a lot of nowadays the ag tools are all pretty interconnected. Lots of partnerships are happening now with different products, and so it's a huge time saver and a huge value prop for the customer because they're, like I said before, you're able to kind of put your data in once and use it multiple places, and so that side of it is just becoming stronger and better for the customer to kind of have their tools that they use on their farm be tied together more. It just allows consistent data as well to be shared. Now, that being said, it's definitely up to us in the industry to keep those integrations solid and simple for the user.
Mm-hmm. And also, which brings us to our next point, also secure. And this is, a question that many farmers have. How do you ensure that farmers remain in control of their data when they're inputting this data? They're obviously allowing some of it to be shared between some platforms, but how do you ensure that farmers stay in control of that data?
Yeah, good question. This is something that we feel really strongly about, so much so that in 2018 we became the first Canadian software company to receive the Ag Data Transparent certification. And so what that is it's basically a certification that protects customers' data by setting guidelines for how companies can collect, store, and analyze and use their data. And so there's all kinds of protocols and different things that we need to meet in order to get that certification. And so we're very proud to be the first one to do that. And among now, many companies are also having that certification as well.
Now, AgExpert, as you mentioned, you've got sort of the accounting side and then also the field level operations side for this particular product. What's next for AgExpert? Where do you see this product going and evolving?
Yeah, we're just continuing on our pursuit for the most accurate cost of production tool on the market. So we're just continuing to build our product network as well as further integrating our two products, field and accounting. And so tying those two platforms together just to really tie the financial side of your operation with the operational side and allow you to have all those data points and expenses and different pieces tying together for you to make decisions. So anything we're doing now and going forward feeds into our mission of making record keeping touchless and automated. That's really where we're headed. And so everything that we kind of do is catered towards that.
What you just heard was a product spotlight paid for by the contribution from Farm Credit Canada. Covered a lot of ground here today on RealAg on the Weekend, specifically related to the federal budget. Corn and wheat-based ethanol not looked upon very favorably. We've had changes to the capital or the capital gains exemption, I should say. We've got changes to some of the rebates around carbon. There's a whole lot in this budget. I want your reaction. And I want you also to address my question at the beginning. Do you feel that this budget makes Canada more or less competitive? And what about the word productivity? Does this help address our productivity issues? There was investment in artificial intelligence. That has to help if it comes to having some sort of impact and not just the money is just the first step on that. Send me your thoughts. Haney at RealAgriculture.com. Encourage you to go to RealAgriculture.com here over your weekend and throughout the week. And you can subscribe to all of our free newsletters by going to RealAgriculture.com/subscribe. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg on the weekend. You've been listening to 650 CKOM, 980 CGME. I'm your host, Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture.com. Cheers, everybody.